Well, good morning and welcome to the Engage Bible Study at Prince of Peace Lutheran Church. My name is Jason Craney, and I serve as one of the pastors here. And on behalf of everyone that calls this place home, I want to say welcome. Welcome to Engage. As always, we've got a few announcements at the top so you can stay involved and in the know about what's happening at Prince of Peace. And so I'm going to go ahead and share a screen here so that you can see them if you would like to write them down. The first announcement is this. So Engage has for quite a while supported two young men at Doulos Discovery School in the Dominican Republic. Now, Doulos is a school that Prince of Peace helped to found and is one that Prince of Peace has supported through the years. And you can continue to give and support these two young men by sending a check to Prince of Peace Finance Office with Engage Offering in the memo line, and our finance office will do the rest. And together, we will continue to support these young men. Second announcement is this. We are in the middle of our Get It Done capital campaign. It's an exciting time to be at Prince of Peace, to say the least. And I just want to make sure you know how to find more information. Now, on our website, we have a website set up. And you can follow this link. I'm going to switch shares here. So that you can see this web page we have on our website. And on this web page, you can find just about everything you need. There are fly-through videos so that you can see what the proposed new space will look like. There is a blog that tells you what's happening and when, and the details that you'll need to know. There's more specific fly-through videos that you can check out. And down here, there is an online commitment form. I don't know about you, but I've never really been a paper commitment form kind of a person. I am 35, after all, clearly young. And so I was excited to find that there's an online commitment form that I can fill out to pledge to this phase of our building and campus transformation. And so you can find that here. And then down here at the bottom, there is an FAQ that's got just about everything that you could want to know to sort of give you the scoop about this whole process that we've been in. And while I have you, I'll just let you know why it is I am planning on giving this time around. And we did last time too, but a couple of years ago, we were preparing to move out of our house because we were moving down here to Burnsville to be closer to Prince of Peace. And I don't know if you've ever moved before, but we found ourselves in this situation where we were trying to get everything just so that we could sell the house. And so one of those projects was to finally finish all the planters and the edging in our gardens. And then another one of those projects was to finally finish painting all of the trim in the house. For whatever reason, like lots of people do, we started painting all of the wood colored trim white. Fun. Anyway, it occurred to me as I was painting the trim, man, Jason, it would have been so much better and you would have enjoyed this house so much more had you just got it done sooner than this. Because at that point, we were like 2 weeks out from starting to show the house. And it just seemed to me that, you know, how much more would we have enjoyed that place had we just had it done when we could have had it done. And I think about our process here in the Get It Done campaign and in our campus transformation. And it has been in the works for the entirety of my son's life. For 4 years, we've been working on this process of getting it done. And I would love for him to be able to enjoy it. And we have been in the process of finding our vision, mission, and values for even longer than my older son's life. So for 8 years. And I just long for the day, for the day when we are ready for what's next and when we're done with this process. And so I encourage you, if you haven't already, to make a commitment and to join in this capital campaign to get it done. Now, one last announcement for you is this. Down here, we have been keeping all of these engaged Bible studies. So you can find study guides for you and your small group, previous recordings, and helpful links at our website. And I'll go ahead and follow this link so that you can see that. So let me share this website for you. So on this website, on our web page at Prince of Peace, you can see It's got a nice little header here, Online Engaged Bible Study. And while you're here, we've got the most recent edition here. It's an embedded link to our YouTube channel, so you can watch it if you want. This is a 14-minute one, so this was clearly not me that recorded that. Yeah, definitely Jeff. But over here, you can find the study guides in PDF form so that they're easy to download and to print off. A little bit of an overview here for the theme. And then down here, if you're working with a small group, or if you're just planning which one of these you want to watch and maybe don't, we have the schedule. So you can see what we're going to see next and who is leading the study. And then down here, we have sort of a suggested way to do this, particularly if you're leading a small group. And, you know, it's the new year, and it would be a great time to start up a small group around the Engaged study. We've got all of this for you. It is free to download and for you to use with your group. And, you know, I think it's pretty good stuff. So I think that is all I have in the way of announcements. And, well, I guess maybe the last one is this. Maybe you've noticed that each time I do one of these things, I'm using a different medium for the study. And I'll just say that this Zoom world has really pressed us at Prince of Peace to find new ways to connect with one another and to collaborate. One of those things that we're using here is a system called Miro. And basically what it is an infinite whiteboard. And you know what? It's not the prettiest thing all the time, but man, is it useful. So I use this thing for, well, this now, but I use it for confirmation. I use it for one-on-ones, for meetings, and for tracking ideas and documents. It's awesome. So if this is not a paid advertisement, I'm just wowed by this technology. It's called Miro, so M-I-R-O. You can check that out on your own time. With that being said, let's jump into our study. Now, during this season of Engage, we are working through Paul's prison letters. So these are letters that Paul wrote while he was in prison or under house arrest. And we're calling the series Little Letters, Big Wisdom. And today we're going to be working through a section in the second chapter of Paul's letter to the church at Philippi. And just in case you'd like to see an outline for that, or for where we're going today, this is a little bit of what we'll be doing. Well, this is all of what we'll be doing. And I've broken this section into 3 parts. Now, granted, each one of these could be its own study. Definitely each one of these could be its own sermon. But here we're going to work through these 3 sections. And the first one is this, 12 through 18, shine brightly for Christ. And then there's 19 through 24, Paul commends Timothy. And 25 to 30, Paul commends Epaphroditus. And then we'll end like we always do with one big question. So if you're outlining this study for yourself, this is what it's going to look like. I will read the passage. I'll share a bit of an illustration to kind of get you to connect it to real world. We'll do a little bit of diving into the text, and then just an application idea and or question for you to take to the bank with you. So that being said, let's go ahead and jump into this first section. Shine brightly for Christ. Now, let me reveal that. Let's go ahead and read this together if you can see it. Dear friends, you always followed my instructions when I was with you. So Paul was with this church at Philippi. He helped set it up. And now that I'm away, it is even more important. Work hard to show the results of your salvation, obeying God with deep reverence and fear. For God is working in you, giving you the desire and the power to do what pleases him. And isn't that good news that God doesn't just make us do it on our own, that God gives us the gift of faith, right? Do everything without complaining and arguing, so that no one can criticize you. Live clean, innocent lives as children of God, shining like bright lights in a world full of crooked and perverse people. Hold firmly to the word of life. Then, on the day of Christ's return, I will be proud that I did not run the race in vain and that my work was not useless. But I will rejoice even if I lose my life, pouring it out like a liquid offering to God, just like your faithful service is an offering to God. And I want all of you to share in that joy. Yes, you should rejoice, and I will share your joy. Good stuff from Paul there. Good stuff. Now, let me share this with you. Grable van lines. So after, I don't know if you've ever had a really difficult job, but I have had a handful of them. And the summer after my senior year was one of them. The summer after my senior year of college, I got a job as a residential mover. A buddy of mine, buddy of my father, Todd, owned a moving company. And suffice it to say that it was the most difficult job I've ever had in my life. It was physically grueling, but also just psychologically demanding because every day you would pull up to a house and either one of these trucks would be full and you'd have to unload it, or it would be empty and you'd have to load it. And those are 54-foot long trucks. That is big. And so you had to do a little bit of, positive self-talk just to get through the morning. Well, one day I was part of a crew that was sent. I'm from Des Moines. So we were sent from Des Moines to a town just outside of Iowa City, Coralville. And we were there to pack a farmhouse because the owner unfortunately had kicked the bucket and the family was looking to unload the house and to pull out of the property. Now, my boss, Todd, brought us into the home. And as soon as we came in the front door, I knew, as it was the case a lot of times, I knew it was going to be a long day. And it looked like, and one of the reasons why was because as soon as you walked in, you could tell that there were times when they brought the cattle inside during the winter. And the smell was just right. But not only that, the place I was supposed to pack, the basement, had not a little standing water in it. So I think the whole reason that my boss Todd came with us that morning, because he didn't always do that, was for moral support, to get us rolling, so that the job didn't seem more impossible than it seemed at the time. Well, about noon, he had to take off to another job. And so we were there, us, the crew, were there to keep unpacking until it was done. And I'm sure at some point in a difficult job that you have had, you've been in a similar situation where you had some help of someone clearly more experienced and competent and determined than you were on a tough project, only to have that person then entrust that project to you. Well, that's what happened here. And it was a challenge. It was a challenge to stay positive. It was a challenge to know what to do next. And especially since most of the stuff I was packing in the basement seemed like garbage, I was like, can I just have a garbage box? And like sometimes the bottom of the boxes would get wet and it was a whole deal. But anyways, it was a challenge to know what to do. And it was a challenge to know that probably we wouldn't get done in the course of a normal business day, which as a 22-year-old was really important because I always had plans after work. But thankfully, it seemed that when we got lowest, Todd would call or text to see if we needed support and to remind us how important the work was. The work was difficult, and an 8-hour day quickly turned into a 14-hour day. We did eventually get the job done. Now, this is essentially the dynamic we have in the churches that Paul is setting up, and particularly here in Philippi. Now, it is easy to forget as we read these short little letters, Philippians is teeny tiny, that the network of churches that Paul set up in a relatively short amount of time was huge. It was massive. Now, if you just look down here at the scale, the legend here for this map, like you see that 200-mile tick, for just an inch. Paul is covering that in the ancient world by foot and by boat. Epic. And we're up here in Philippi. Now think of some of these other letters to other cities where he set up churches. Thessalonica, over here. Corinth, way down here. Ephesus, way over here. So Paul is all over the place. And so as you can see, there are hundreds of miles between the churches. And so like my boss, there was no way he could stay in one place very long, let alone while he was in prison. And so he sent these letters and disciples who were willing to travel for the sake of the gospel to support these churches. And I think in this passage, he does support us with two really important reminders. And the first point for you to write down, if you're writing things down at home, is this. Though you may not always know the next right step, you can trust that your relationship with God is secure. So keep on working. Now we see this in verses 12 and 13. It's to work hard to show the results of your salvation, obeying God with deep reverence and fear. For God is working in you, giving you the desire and the power to do what pleases him. In other words, though you may not always the next right step, though you may not always know the next right step, you can trust that your relationship with God is secure. So keep on working. Now, one of the things that really gave me pause when I was working in that basement that day was, I was worried that I would do something wrong. But one of the things that Todd said when he left us alone there in that basement was just keep on working and making the best choices you can make. I trust you. And I know that you will figure this out. And that's why I brought you here. And I think the same is true in our faith when we're not quite sure what to do next. And boy, is this last year given us a lot of those situations. But the good news is this: our salvation is secure. And so we don't have to be anxious about, getting tossed aside if we don't do something right. Because of the grace of God, we are secure. And so our job is just to be faithful and to keep on working. Now, the second point I think we can draw out of this passage is this. We find this in verse 15, and we read, "Live clean and innocent lives as children of God, shining like bright lights in a world full of crooked and perverse people." Now, a deeply held belief of Paul, because it was something he himself experienced, was that the light of Christ can change who you are. The light of Christ can change who you are. Additionally, that part of the change that happens as a result of an experience with Christ is that you are filled with the Spirit of Christ. Now, as Lutherans, sometimes we often don't always talk about that third person of the Trinity, the Holy Spirit. But friends, it is essential that as we are working out our salvation, our faithful following of Jesus into the world today, that we recognize that the Spirit of Christ goes with us, empowers us, equips us in those ways that we might not know or recognize to do that work. We are filled with the Spirit of Christ, the same Emmanuel, or God with us, or light of the world. And the takeaway here is this: it's that you have the Spirit of the light of the world in you to shine brightly in whatever way God is calling you to shine in. Now, let's think about how to apply this. I love this picture. Now, each new year, and certainly in the context of our current circumstances, 2020, anybody, it can seem impossible to find our way forward as the local church. What do we do next? We might even wonder if it is worth moving forward at all. Like, what difference are we making? Well, I think that this passage encourages us to remember that we, like this church in Philippi, have been preceded and led by countless saints on our journey. Now, this figure here walking, this person here walking, kind of feels like us. And these lights here, it sort of suggests that there are lights before him, and this person is now following the lights ahead of him. And I love that passage that says that we are surrounded by a great cloud of witnesses, a multitude of witnesses. And I believe that that is certainly true for us right now. And I think that it can lead us to asking a really great question. Who are the saints that you can look up to, that can guide you in the season? Who are the saints that have gone before us, those bright lights filled with the Spirit of Christ that have gone before us? And who are those people ahead of us? So maybe you might think of a family member or a small group leader you had back in the day that encouraged you, was a bright light in your life. But then, and especially in these weeks in the Get It Done campaigns, we're talking about our ministry to kids. Like, who are those kids that are bright lights for our future as the church that can guide you forward? Your grandchildren or your children or some other young people that you know, new Christians. Who are those saints that you look up to that can guide you in this season? So let's move on to our next section here. Now let's read this together. Make this bigger, just like that. All right. Paul commends Timothy. And he says this: "If the Lord Jesus is willing, I hope to send Timothy to you soon for a visit. Then he can cheer me up by telling me how you are getting along. I have no one else like Timothy, who genuinely cares about your welfare. So this suggests that Paul has people he's working with, but Timothy stands out. All the others only care for themselves and not for what matters to Jesus Christ. But you know how Timothy has proved himself. Like a son with his father. He's talking about their relationship. He has served with me in preaching the good news. I hope to send him to you just as soon as I find out what is going to happen to me here. So Paul is apparently awaiting some news. And I have confidence from the Lord that I myself will come to see you soon. All right. Now here's a bit of a story. Hopefully that can anchor that to your experience. So I was finishing up my undergraduate degree. I went to Simpson College in good old Indianola, Iowa, bustling metropolis of Indianola. And as I was finishing up, I began the process of applying to master's programs, to seminary. And one of those seminaries had, which is a huge incentive to go there, a full tuition scholarship program. And so I had to, as a part of that process, fill out some paperwork, and I had to go on campus for an interview process on campus. Now, coming into the interview, I really didn't know what to expect. And there weren't a lot of details that I had to go on that could really guide my preparation. And so I really just kind of thought, I'd talk about my sense of call and, the big issues that seemed important to me at the time. And, well, really all I knew was that the scholarship was for young people who wanted to be in the church. And I was like, well, I'm young. I want to be in the church. So this seems like something I can do. I can probably riff my way through this thing. And I was wrong. I don't know if you've ever gone into an interview process and you were not as prepared as you should have been. Yeah, it was that kind of a feeling. And by the end of the interview, I did not feel as though it had gone well, to say the least. And I was all but sure that I wasn't going to get the scholarship. And I was, thankfully, wrong again. Now, sometime after the fact, I got a chance to talk to the admissions staff that helped to proctor that whole interview process. And I found out that one of the reasons they chose me and not other people was because of a letter that my campus pastor and a letter that my home church pastor had written, a reference letter that they read, and that encouraged them to, go out on a limb, because maybe this kid doesn't interview well, but he's got some other redeeming qualities. And I was saved by this reference letter. Now, Paul was giving Timothy a reference letter to the church at Philippi before he sent him there in his absence. And they already knew, this church at Philippi, they already knew who Timothy was, but Paul was making extra sure that they knew what kind of person Timothy was. And so he goes out of his way to make sure that the community knows that Timothy has Paul's blessing, and that Timothy is going to go back to Philippi and to bring news, in order to bring news back to Paul. Now, there are 3 key points, I think, or 2 key points that I think we can take away here for our work today. Point number 1 is this. I'm going to reveal that. So a key image we have here of Christian discipleship is that of spiritual family. Now, there's clearly, natural born family and adopted family and that kind of stuff. But one of the key things we like to talk about in discipleship in the church, and especially for older people and younger people in relationship, is spiritual family. And we get that here in this passage. It's this sort of mentoring, and it's a key component in what it means to be church. So in the ancient world, you would see more often something very different. You wouldn't see, Paul going out of his way to mentor Timothy like a son, because in the ancient world, sons more often than not would follow their fathers into whatever line of work their father did. And that isn't what we get here. These two are not related. And so the fact that it is all happening at all is special in the way that it is redefining social relationships in a world where social relationships are deeply contextual and often fixed. And now I think that that is an important point, certainly in the ancient world, but also something that we need to think about in our modern world, as there are a lot of social relationships that seem fixed. And we need to be willing to let God have some leeway to help us redefine them when they are not useful or conducive to the spreading of the good news of the gospel. So something we need to know is that Oftentimes the kingdom of God is doing a new thing, and we need to be willing to follow that. Now, many of us have roles in the community that provide mentorship for young people. And so we know something of the truth of this passage. Now, many people who are educators, coaches, or strictly mentors, like in the case of Big Brothers Big Sisters, have seen the way that an unrelated adult can change the course of a young person's life. You can do that. In fact, many of you have even taken the time to be small group leaders at Prince of Peace. And from the bottom of my heart, thank you. And also, I just want to say, we are getting ready to do that come this summer again in 2020, this fall in 2021. We're excited to get back on campus. But you have found probably your own Timothy in confirmation, or maybe you have been that Timothy who your spiritual family, father, mother, has poured into. And so you know of the impact you can make. And friends, that is the work of the church. It is surprising relationships having surprising results in a surprising kingdom of God. Now, point number 2. Let's take a peek here. It's hidden for now, but now it's not. Point number 2. Now, Paul clearly has other people that he is working with elsewhere. And that is an important point. He goes out of his way to mention. But none of them, as it appears, seem to be like Timothy in one key way. Paul says that they don't genuinely care about people. Have you ever known a pastor like that didn't genuinely care about people? Maybe they shouldn't have a church. This, Paul says, makes Timothy uniquely qualified to be a pastor. And Timothy has his interests and heart in line with Jesus' interests and heart. When we look to see what Jesus has his heart and interest on, we find that he's focusing on people. And so here, as elsewhere, we're seeing play out a familiar archetype for the pastor or for minister and in the church. And it isn't the eloquent or the powerful, but the shepherd. The one who lays down their life for the sheep. And so it makes us think about people like Moses, about David, Jesus, and how Timothy all fit that example. Now, this is that shepherd archetype that is so important throughout the Bible. And I think it's important for us to consider that, because sometimes in our professionalized world, we are keen on ensuring that the people we trust for ministry check a whole bunch of boxes, right? As congregations, we do that in our hiring, and certainly as we're watching sermons, we do that in our watching. We judge people for their fitness, however defined, for ministry. And what would it mean for us to really think about whether or not the person we are considering for this or that position in our ministry, whether volunteer or paid, or ourselves for that matter, have this simple quality that Paul commends to us about Timothy? Simply being passionate about the same things that Jesus is passionate about. People, right? Lost coin, lost sheep, right? Being a shepherd. You know, it makes you wonder what the real criteria we should set for ourselves and what the extent to which we should hold people to those criteria or this one that Paul holds up here. And I think the bottom line is this, is that when it comes to ministry, it isn't about sort of like professional qualification. The point, it seems, is that God has called us and we're to respond in the best way that we know how. And so I wonder if you have ever felt like you have not been qualified for ministry. Now, I ask that sort of already knowing the answer, so a little bit rhetorically. I remember, here, let me reveal this guy. Throughout the course of my ministry, and it's really come from an older demographic. When I walk into the room with a collar on or as a pastor, there is an automatic deference that happens. There's an automatic sense that I get in people that they look at me having had whatever background and training that I've had, and they compare it to whatever background and training they have not had. And there's like this wide gap in their perceived potential of themselves in ministry. And it always makes my heart ache a little bit because I feel like people discount themselves and their capacity to simply be this shepherd archetype that Paul lifts up here and commends to us about Timothy. And so, friends, I really want you to wonder and to really press in this week into this. In what ways are you a shepherd? Because that is really at the heart of what it is to be a pastor. It's not being eloquent or being good on camera or any of these other things. It is simply to care for people, to be passionate about them in the way that Jesus is. Amen. I will take a sip of coffee to that. Now, let's jump over here to our last section for the day. Oh, nope, that's the illustration. You didn't see that. Let's pop up here. Here it is. There's the text. And let's make it bigger and bigger. Great. So this is Philippians 2:25 to 30. Let's read it here. Meanwhile, I thought I should send Epaphroditus back to you. He is a true brother, co-worker, and fellow soldier, and he was your messenger to help me in my need. I am sending him because he has been longing to see you, and he was very distressed that you heard he was ill. And he certainly was ill. In fact, he almost died, but God had mercy on him and also me, so that I would not have one sorrow after another. And so I am all the more anxious to send him back to you, for I know you will be glad to see him. And then I will be not so worried about you. Welcome him in the Lord's love. And clearly there was something going on here. Let me get rid of that. Boop. And with great joy, and give him the honor that people like him deserve, for he risked his life for the work of Christ, and he was at the point of death, while doing for me what you couldn't do from far away. Now, here's a way to think about this, what's happening in this passage, and I love this. So once there was a teacher in a classroom who had some young kids who asked about why they thought we had two eyes. And one kid who really didn't do the reading, or was just trying to be funny, answered that the reason that you had two eyes was so that you had a spare, just in case you lost the other one. And true as that may be, the real answer has to do with this. Having two eyes is what helps us to have perspective in our vision. Having two eyes helps us to see the world in 3D, helps us to judge distance, and helps us to understand the speed at which we are moving. It gives you perspective, that second eye. And these short little passages are doing that, I hope, for us when we look at Paul. Now, for a lot of us, the whole reason we do these Bible studies is so that we'll have the right answer or the right combination of theological ideas to satisfy other Christians usually, and maybe at a deep, unspoken level, God. In other words, we're here for the theology. And well, to address that desire in us, a lot of the reason we're reading these prison letters from Paul is so that we keep perspective in our discipleship, and so that you keep perspective on Paul. Now, a lot of good Lutherans I know love to go straight to the book of Romans, which Paul also wrote. And that book is a straight up tome. It is some tough sledding of theological ideas and propositions. It is a place where if you love dense run-on sentences in Greek, well, that's the book for you. But here, though, in the pastoral letters, we begin to see the depth of Paul and the depth with which Paul approached the world. Yes, we find that it is about good theology, but it is also about having open, wide, and healthy hearts. Open, wide, and healthy hearts. Now, in the pastoral letters, we begin to see the depth of Paul and the depth with which Paul approached the world. And additionally, if we only spend a little bit of time, if we only spent time with the theology that Paul writes, then we might be led to believing that if we just know the right things and apply it evenly, that we won't experience hardship or experience the world hardly. These prison letters help us to realize in each area where we hear Paul struggle, celebrate, and emote, that discipleship isn't static, nor are the disciples. In fact, we are dynamic human beings with a range of experiences and emotions. We are human. And so here's what I want you to see. Yep, let me reveal that. Oh, here we go. I love this picture because the two of them are walking together. But here you can kind of see in this guy's face and in his hands, worry, anxiety. And you can see sort of in the way that this person is looking ahead that there seem to be headwinds. And the truth is, friends, if we have anything in common, especially in the last year. And as we look ahead to this year, we have a little bit of anxiety and some headwinds to contend with. And so here's what I think we can take away from here. This passage, I think, underscores the humanity in all of us, and certainly in Paul. Epaphroditus is a seldom mentioned but critical character in the biblical history. He was the chosen person from the church at Philippi to visit Paul while Paul was under house arrest. The people in Philippi sent him to see Paul with something of a care package that Paul references there. Now, the trouble was that while Epaphroditus was there visiting Paul, he became very ill while he was visiting. And this is the occasion for us to not only learn how good a messenger Epaphroditus was, but also more of the humanity of Paul. And we see this in verse 27, especially so as we read that Epaphroditus was very ill and that God took pity on him and spared him. But in sparing Epaphroditus, Paul says, God spared Paul. Now, I don't know if you've ever had someone who is sick in your life, and though they are the person sick, like your heart just aches with them. And then when they turn the corner, that burden, that weight on you is also lifted. And that's a little bit of what Paul is talking about here. If you've ever been with people who are battling a disease of one kind or another, then you know the relief that can come to you when their health comes. Paul was worried. He was scared for his friend Epaphroditus. And he was also genuinely relieved when he recovered. And the point that I want you to take from that is this. Paul isn't a tin man without a heart, and you shouldn't be one either. Our discipleship shouldn't be something that causes us to leave behind our emotions and our feelings. They are precisely what makes us human. And not just Paul, but our Savior, Jesus Christ, showed a wide variety of emotions in the midst of bringing in this new world, right? They can coexist in the same place. It is a both and thing in our discipleship. Point 2. This, I think, unlocks another important idea. Elsewhere, Paul writes about the way that he rejoices in his suffering or present trials. Now, maybe you, like I have, read those passages and thought, you what, Paul? Like, what do you mean? You rejoice in your suffering? Well, this past year, I have heard this idea weaponized, this idea of Paul's weaponized to say something along the lines of, if you're not happy in the midst of your sorrow, then you're not a faithful Christian. Have you heard that? Friends, I want to tell you right now, that couldn't be farther from what Paul means here. Now, clearly, Paul is anguished at the prospect of losing his friend, and yet he is also rejoicing. It isn't either or, it is both and. And the way that he is rejoicing is by clinging to the promise, to the hope of the gospel, which Paul reminds us and himself so frequently, that the Christ that has been raised from the dead, and that Christ joins us to him. And if we've been joined in a death like his, then we will be joined in a life like his. And to rejoice in the way that Paul is to live in this tension. And that is what Paul is doing as he watches Epaphroditus recover. And so, friends, we rejoice in our suffering. It is both and. We do both of them at the same time. Now, here's how you might apply that in a real concrete way that I really commend to you. And so how can we approach this? Well, consider how you really feel. Now, a lot of good Lutherans are pretty, often have a stiff upper lip and don't necessarily want to share what they feel with others. Well, how about starting here and simply sharing what you feel with yourself and maybe in prayer with God? And a great tool to help you do that I use regularly is this. It's called a feeling wheel. It helps me in my own discipleship and prayer life identify how I actually feel, because often when I am caught up in emotions, I really can't distinguish between them. A lot of things just feel the same to me. I don't know, maybe that's similar for you. And so when you get into a situation, look for the emotion on the wheel that feels right for you. And just look at this. Like, most of us experience life here in this core area. But look at all of the different shades of emotions that God has given us that point to what is actually happening in us that we can actually invite God into to redeem and to restore and to bring life to. And so my encouragement to you is this. What are you feeling in your suffering this week, and why? and use that question to frame your prayer life. Because I think that if you do, you're going to really know what it is to experience the world in the way that Paul did. Now, whew, what a thick piece of text, right? So as we close for the day, I want to leave you, as we always do, with one final question. And this is that. So who do you identify with the most in this passage? Well, these passages. Is it Paul? Is it Timothy? Is it Epaphroditus? Is it the church at Philippi? And this week I want you to consider why that might be. And you can do this this week. And you can find even more study questions if you just hop over here, like I mentioned earlier, to our Engage library here at popmn.org/ministry/Bible/study. And you can find all of those things. But as we close, I do also want to remind you of our Get It Done campaign, which is in progress. And finally, our Engage offering, which goes to support a couple of young men at Doulos Discovery School. Friends, it is always a pleasure and an honor to be with you and to dig into God's Word with you. It's one of my favorite things that we do as a church together because there's just so much there to help us grow in our faith. So hopefully today you learned something from Paul, Timothy, and Epaphroditus in the church of Philippi that you can use to engage with your faith this week. Thank you for joining us, and we will see you next time. Bye.